Hey folks, this week Dan joins me and we talk with Anthony Annunziata about open source artificial intelligence. Anthony is the director of AI Open Innovation at IBM and the co-founder of the AI Alliance, definitely an expert in the field. He entertains all of our questions about AI in general and then talks about what open and open source means for AI models. It's a great interview and you definitely do not want to miss it. This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 804, recorded Tuesday, October the 8th. The AI Alliance, Asimov was right. It's time for FLOSS Weekly. That's the show about free, libre, and open source software. I am, of course, your host, Jonathan Bennett, and we've got something fun today. We're going to talk about AI, or maybe it's LLM, maybe it's just big computers doing lots of math. We've got somebody that is sort of the expert on this. But first off, we've got Dan the Man, the original Linux outlaw, Mr. Dan. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I've got to confess, I was slightly worried then when you said we've got an expert in all of this. I thought you were going to say that was me, because I can't confess to be an expert on AI or LLM, large language models. But I try. Yeah, it's good to be back.
Dan, you're probably a lot like me. You don't necessarily claim to be an expert in much of anything. We're just we're jack of all trades. We are very generalists, right? Is that kind of where you're at too with all this?
Pretty much. I think it's dangerous to claim you're an expert in anything, really, because then somebody will go, "Aha, are you though? Are you really?"
It's the what do they call it? The Dunning-Kruger curve, where it's like when you first learn about something, yes, I know all about this, and it's easy. Why are you guys making it so hard? And then as you learn more and more about it, you finally get to the point of, oh, this is ridiculously complicated, and I don't know anything about it. And that is when you have actually started to understand.
That's very true.
I think AI is very much like that, or LLMs. I sort of resist calling this AI. I don't think we're close enough to a general artificial intelligence to really refer to any of the things that are out there as AI. But obviously, people have different opinions about that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about the AI Alliance and sort of kind of also IBM and what IBM is doing with AI. Our guest is Anthony Annunziata, maybe? We'll ask him how he pronounces his last name.
I don't think that's right.
That's probably not right. That's probably not. I made the old college try. I gave it my best. All right, well, let's go ahead and bring him on since we've got the man right here. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, welcome. Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. Really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here. How do you pronounce your last name? I'm sure I butchered it.
A little. Yeah, it's Annunziata. Or something around that.
Yeah, I way Americanized that.
All good. Yeah, I think I Americanized it a little bit too, but you Americanized it even more.
Yeah, I am the American that's turned up to 11, I guess. So we talked briefly before the show, and you mentioned that you sort of dual represent for what we're talking about today, being both part of IBM's AI effort and the AI Alliance. You want to kind of maybe start by mapping out what that means, what those roles are in those two different places, what we're talking about here?
Yeah, sure. Happy to.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as you said, I kind of serve two roles. My main role, where I'm employed is at IBM, and I lead open innovation in AI here. That means a lot of things. That includes open source, data and models as well, and partnerships and community engagement. And I'll tell you more about, specifics there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as part of that, as an extension of that, I have a role in the AI Alliance, which is a program that IBM and a number of others have put together about 9 months ago. Mm-hmm. And that's an open innovation, open source, open program that is intended to promote in many ways open development and adoption of AI in a responsible way. So I have the position of co-chair of the steering committee and direct involvement in a few of the working groups as part of that organization.
Yeah. All right. Interesting. So I think maybe the thing to go to first. We were talking before the show. I think it's before you joined the call even. But last week I had Simon Phipps on as a co-host / guest, and he was talking about how the open source definition for artificial intelligence, for AI, for open source AI is sort of something that's still being written, because it doesn't necessarily work the same way that source code does. And I'm curious what the sort of the AI Alliance and IBM take on this is. Have you guys been involved with trying to write that definition? And what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, wow, great topic. Okay, so lots to say here.
Yeah.
From an IBM perspective, we have been in discussion, dialogue, providing feedback to various efforts, right, that are trying to better define what open source means in AI, and in particular, like what the source term means, and whether it's actually applicable or it's a different sort of thing. So yeah, we've provided feedback. We've been part of that dialogue. I think it's fair to say today that the community is moving forward to try to understand what open source means in AI. I don't think it's an answered question yet. And from an alliance perspective, right, more broadly, that's kind of a microcosm of people's broader involvement and opinions, right? Lots of orgs are starting to weigh in more specifically, but a lot of people are concerned, if not the whole picture, then let's define enough commonality, right, to be useful. And often that rests around like what is a model, right? What is an LLM? What is an open source LLM? Does that term mean? Is it meaningful, or is it something different?
Yeah, and so where would you draw the line? What definition do you like for, let's say we're talking about a particular model? If we wanted to define this, so like LLMs obviously is one of the big things that people are working with right now. And so if we want to push one out that we say this is, put the stamp of approval, this is open source, what should that mean? What should that look like?
Yeah, so the way I like to do it, I like to go back to the fundamentals of open source, right? What does open source enable you to do? What kind of actions ought you as a developer be able to do, right? So, it comes down to, can you study, modify, use, share the artifact? Like, we've become very comfortable with what that means in terms of code, right? Source code, but an AI model is something pretty different. In particular, the types of models today, right? They're pre-trained, they're very large, and they're in some sense kind of compiled objects, right? They're not really source, but there are elements that kind of sort of are source-like within them. So the way I like to do it is look at the model as an artifact, and then look at kind of the broader picture of what an AI system is and how you get to a model, right? The whole training regime. So the model itself is primarily a set of so in general they're neural nets, right? And neural nets that have weights for the different nodes. And so a key part of what it means to have a model that's open is the weights, all of the weights, right? All the parameters are open, accessible in a way that you can study, modify, use, and share them without encumbrance, right? And so I think the minimum, right, practical definition is really what is an open model or an open weight model, and it has to be at least the weights, right? The weights after training, so that those are the key descriptors of the neural net and what it takes to run it, and then some basic information at least about the characteristics, right? The behavior, right, of that model, right, which is a set of weights in a neural net architecture. That's like the bare minimum. I wouldn't call that open source AI yet, though, but that is really like an open model in my view. And I think an open model is a piece of the story, and it's in some ways the most important piece because it's the new and weird and hard to understand and sometimes hard to use piece.
So in thinking through this, and as I said, I am by no means an AI expert. By no means. I am sort of just an outside observer looking into all this. But one of the interesting things about these LLMs is they can vary greatly based on what training data goes into them. And in sort of thinking about this, openness, open source, yes, but also like openness, trying to understand them. One of the things that would be really, really important is maybe not having the entire data set that trained them, because as we know, that in some cases can be prohibitively large data sets. But at least having an accurate descriptor of that data set, or maybe even, how was this data set modified before the training happened? Because certainly that must happen, because there's in data sets, they're spurious data, right? There are things, to put it simply, there are things on the internet that you may not want your LLM to have inside of it, right? And like that's a valid thing, but at the same time, if we're going to be open about the model, and if we want it to be something we can call open source, certainly that's something that we need to understand from the get-go, right? Is this? I assume this is part of the thinking about this as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, a big part of building a model, a big part of understanding behavior model is the data sources, but more importantly, the whole pipeline of processing that the data goes through before you start to actually train the model, right? So one of the things that is really important is transparency, right? Short of, permissive use of the actual artifacts and pieces of the pipeline, are you at least transparent about, where your data are from, but more importantly, the various filtering and processing of the data that's done before it starts to train the model. Yeah, for sure. Super important. And yeah, the types of things people do that are really important and that are kind of emerging standards are you need to, there's a whole bunch of processing in terms of formatting and getting the data ready to process. But key parts are, removal of hate, abuse, and profanity, removal of personally identifiable information. In most cases, most responsible cases, checking against known copyrights and removing those. These are really important. And even short of like what it means to have a full open source AI system, right? Because this is an emerging, kind of definition and discussion. I think even more people converge on agreement on is it's very important to have transparency on how you process your data, the choices you've made, right? And people may disagree with those choices, but at least articulate clearly the choices you've made in cleaning and preparing the data to build the model.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about something that when you're doing scientific endeavors that you have to worry about is the different biases, and I'm using this term more of a technical term, the different biases that it's in your data set. Because you may think that you're just cleaning your data, but you may actually be removing some of the information that you're looking for. And the same thing can happen with these LLM models. And so like what one person may have the opinion that, oh, this is hate speech, or this is just noise in the data, or we want to get rid of this. Like that changes your output in ways that in some cases we don't fully even understand. And so I love that transparency is a core of what you're doing. So I think that is super important with this technology, with this becoming more universally useful and not misleading people even. So I think that's great. Let's see. So I want to ask you about this. And I know it's controversial, but again, we have the experts, so I'm going to pick your brain on things. And that is the idea of copyright when it comes to LLMs and AI. And as far as I know, this has not actually been settled in court. And I think this is probably what's going to have to happen, right? These are questions that are going to have to be settled in court or by written laws. But the idea, as far as I know, is that it is believed that taking information into as a training process for LLM is a transformative work to the point to where you're no longer covered by the original copyright of the information that you trained on. And then a quirk of that is the output, so you write a prompt and you give this to an LLM. You get an output, whether that's an image or a written work. That is then sort of not a copyrightable work. And those are interesting quirks of, and feel free to correct me if I got any of that wrong, but those are interesting quirks of working of AI and LLMs in this day and age. And do you think that's going to stick, or are we going to see laws or court cases that change that? I know you were not prepared maybe to give your legal opinion on things, but it's so integral though to all of this.
This is great. Let's dig in, man. No, yeah. I'm happy to. First, I'm not a lawyer. I don't represent, IBM's legal opinion or AI Alliance members and all that. So,
right.
We'll just go under that caveat.
Yes, sir.
Some things are clear, some things are not clear, and some things are in between. I'd say there's reasonable there's reasonable agreement that if data are out there in the public domain already, that if you train a model on those data, that is a reasonable case of fair use, right? but you have to make sure that you don't redistribute those data, that you haven't gone and gathered those data in places you shouldn't have, and so on. So there's many caveats there, right? And that's why, what I mentioned earlier, like, even though you maybe don't strictly have to, it's good practice to check your training data against known copyrights and make sure they're removed, right?
Right.
There's also progress and methods coming available that allow individuals, in some cases, some of the very open model building efforts. I'll name one from an alliance partner, Big Code, and in the Big Code community initiative to build open weight models. They provided a very nice mechanism for people to go in and look for data from them, right? And request that it be removed just voluntarily, not because it's required to do that under law, just because it's good practice. It's good community practice to enable that to be a possibility. So that's kind of the input end, right? Training. I mean, there's lots more to say about that.
Yeah.
I'd say the output end is actually a little clearer in some ways, right? Because in some sense, like, copyright law is copyright law, right? Like, it doesn't change, right? If me as a person goes and gets a piece of text or a piece of art that is substantially similar to a copyrighted work, I can't go use that, right? And I would be violating the copyright, right? Doesn't matter if I drew it up on my own or I got an AI model to do it or something else, right? Like, if I go try to pass off something that is really similar to another person's copyrighted work, I'm in violation, right?
Draw me a picture that looks sort of like the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Now, where it's murky, right, is the question of whether AI substantially changes the risk and liability picture in terms of copyright violations, right? Is it still just on the user and on the person that goes and tries to distribute something that violates somebody else's copyright, or is there some implication because the technology is so capable, to the technology builder themselves? So that's kind of some of the debate that's happening now.
Yeah. Yeah, I know there are some open source projects that have just said, because of some of these issues, we will not accept any code that has had, like, Copilot, just for instance, Microsoft Copilot. We will not accept any code that has been generated in any way by this tool. It's because they're afraid of that idea of the copyright. There are, and people demonstrated this. Like, there are certain prompts where you can get bits of code out, and then you do a search for that code on the internet, and you can find substantially similar, if not identical, character for character identical copies of the code. And so I know there are places that are just saying, don't bring us any AI generated anything because we're afraid of the copyright problems. And of course there are other problems, particularly with code, because people they misunderstand the LLM tool. And so they think, oh, well, Copilot wrote this, surely it must be good code. And we see the same thing with vulnerability research. Find me a vulnerability in this program, and then people will try to report it. And the problem, particularly with that one, is the LLMs do such a good job of making it look good, but when you finally dig down into what they're telling you, it's almost all the time bogus. But it wastes a lot of time from these maintainers because they've got to do the work because somebody sent them a vulnerability. It's fascinating stuff. It's really interesting.
It really is. Look, I mean, you hit the nail on the head on a couple of big challenges and opportunities, right? Like, on the output end of things, there are better and better methods to try to screen, detect, and block, copyrighted material, but it's definitely not where it needs to be yet. Various guardrail schemes and detector models and all that. So that's a big opportunity and something the Alliance, from a safety and from a quality eval perspective, is working on, as is IBM as part of that. And then the other piece, I think, is really interesting too, which is like, hey, yeah, you're right. LLMs are pretty good, but not great at many things, right? But they're pretty great at making themselves look like they're really great.
Yes.
Right? So whether it's better formatting, markdown, output, things like whatever, it looks pretty good. But when you dig deeper, it's not quite all the way there, right? It's true for code. It's true for text and natural language. So there's this problem, and actually the big problem with adoption, right, with lots of companies that want to use AI. You can get 80, 90, 95% accuracy and reliability, but getting to like high accuracy in use cases that need it, which is a lot of enterprise use cases,
Right.
is pretty tough, right? It's pretty tough.
Yeah. One of the funniest things, people they've come up with different tricks for interacting with AI, which, that's a whole subject in itself. Maybe we'll get to here in a minute. But the one that I think is just about the funniest is with a lot of the models, you can tell it at the end of you ask a question, and at the end of the question say, show your work, cite your sources. And just adding that to your prompt, the quality of result goes up dramatically, and it tends to be more accurate. And I think that is one, it's hilarious, but it's also super interesting that it works so well. Is that something that you see like broadly? Does that trick work across a lot of different models?
It actually works some form of that works across a lot of models and a lot of use cases and modalities, actually. So I think some generalization of that is, think about structured inputs, right? How you specify your prompt input has a big effect on the output quality and the output in general. You see it in code, right? If you can better set up the problem, you can get higher quality code output. If you can better set up, so there's a whole set of patterns called retrieval augmented generation, which is where you hook up an LLM with a database, and the database is vectorized data, so it's in the form of where an LLM can kind of knows how to interact with it.
Yeah.
I can go into much greater technical depth, by the way, if you want. I'll keep it light for now. In those cases, right, we also find that the better you structure that vectorized database, right, the better you structure the data, whether it's in a graph form or some other sort of structured form, you get much higher quality retrieval and output. There's a huge amount of, sometimes it's called prompt engineering, structured inputs, so on and so forth, that are important and determine the output to a big degree.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. I was curious when you talked about copyright there. It made me think a little bit of, I relate a lot of things to the music copyright because that's kind of a little bit of the world that I come from. But when you were saying about a lot of projects won't accept code which has been generated by an LLM, I understand why. I completely understand why. And the fact that you can maybe find, I don't know, a GitHub repository or something where you end up finding it's very similar code. But at the same time, I was thinking to myself, there's only, much like in music, there's only so many notes that you can combine and so many ways to combine those notes, orders you can put them in and so on. Maybe this is something down the road that we'll hit a point where there are only so many ways to make a certain piece of code, and only certain ways to combine different functions and features of the languages that you're using, the programming languages that you're using, and so on. So I wonder if some point down the road they'll find a way of doing that. Because with music, again, I'm not a lawyer in any sense, so please don't take this as legal advice. But it's certainly in the UK anyway. In music copyright, there's laws about how many notes in a row can be the same as another piece of music, for example. It's usually 6 notes, or roughly 6 notes. I wonder if that might be an approach in the future, but you're dealing with such a large data set that I would imagine you get to the point where you need another AI, LLM, whatever, to check the one that's doing the work originally. So I don't know. I'm not really sure where I'm going with that point, but I think maybe at some point in the future we might see that, and it'll have to be tested in court as well, as all these things are.
Yeah.
But with regard to things like copyright, one of the big things that I've seen recently is I have a lot of friends who work in academia, work in universities, places like that. They have a lot of tools now. There's a lot of companies trying to sell their tool, which will check your students' work and check that it's not generated by an LLM. I wonder I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that kind of area, and whether any of that could really be effective, the checking of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots to say there. I think some sense is a little bit of a losing battle to try to just take output and work back to see if it was created by an AI model. I mean, yeah, you can still do that, right? There are patterns, there are recurring words and phrases and things that you can map back with some statistical probability to a model. But I think as models get better and better, as you can adjust things like the variability of output responsive to the use case and lots of other stuff, I think it's going to get really hard to do that. So I think in education, we're going to have to figure out a different solution. I mean, just like it took some challenges, but we figured out how to do math education without a calculator, or the right role for calculators, and the right role for in-classroom work that specifically prohibited calculators. In some sense, we're going to have to figure out how that works now for not just math, because AI can assist with a lot of tasks in the educational setting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some thoughts on that. I mean, it's certainly not. I don't know fully how that's going to play out.
That's okay. I kind of threw that one at you. Don't worry. I'm aware that I just kind of threw that one at you. Yeah, it's.
I mean,
very,
there's
very
one more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could say one more. I think just on the topic of it kind of relates to copyrights and original work and cheating and all of that. I think increasingly the path to show provenance and originality of work is going to be to track the lineage and provenance of non-AI generated material, because there's going to be so much AI generated material, synthetic data, images, and so on. And so many ways and sources and ways to manipulate that. I think probably a better tack is to have better end-to-end methods to track, data and works that came from, not AI, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Like a litmus test, like something to compare it against. It makes sense. So one of the things I found really interesting when I was looking through the AI Alliance website and other things is I noticed a little bit at the bottom where it says, let me just scroll down so I can find it, competition law guidelines. I'm sorry about to get into law again. I don't want to, I know, realize we're not here to talk about the law, but I just found it led me to some thoughts, because it says you've got guidelines published there for how people can interact together without contravening something like antitrust laws, competition laws, all those sorts of things. So I suppose my question is, with so many different bodies working together in the AI Alliance, what are the challenges to kind of get them to work together, and how much can they work together without it being seen as colluding in some way in the market?
Yeah. Hey, this is great. My lead attorney, John McBroom, would love this question. And that you noticed his finely crafted competition law guidelines. Yeah, it's really important. What we put together in the Alliance is a collaboration of various organizations, but it's a tighter collaboration than just kind of individual-led open source, right? And because of that, right, we need to pay extra attention to making sure that everything we're doing is truly open, that it's not, even close to the kind of, cooperative, commercially inspired kind of work that we can't be doing, right? So a lot of this is just basic hygiene of open source. Do your work in the open, publish everything early and often, right? Use GitHub and known processes for contribution management and all that, which we have. It includes, publishing working groups, meetings, events, just making sure that, it's all in the open. People know it's not about keeping anything in the dark or hiding anything. It's really just about bringing people together and orgs together, just for tighter, more coordinated collaboration on open work. So there's a lot of, process, mechanics, hygiene, publication kind of stuff that's, just mostly good open source practice. I'd say that, to the other part of the question, what are the challenges? I mean, there's lots of challenges. This alliance is actually much bigger and grew much faster in terms of members than we were expecting, which is always kind of a nice problem to have. But what that means is there's even more interests and projects and priorities. And so, the way we've handled this is, we've structured the program. Hey, my earbud came out. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, yep.
All right, good. Yeah, sorry, I'm not used to wear this too often. The way we've structured the program, right, is pretty lightweight and ground up. And we've got 6 focus areas, each with multiple working groups and projects, and it's very maintainer, contributor, leader led, right? And so there's typically one or a few sponsoring organizations for each project. There's some individual leads, just like a good open source project, and a roadmap. And so what we try to do is preserve a lot of ground up kind of individual led work, but we provide collaboration, pooling of resources, kind of, a forum for common priorities, and that kind of program structure to kind of better support and scale that kind of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One thing I was interested in, as I mentioned, to do with academia and all that kind of stuff, is how you're engaging. I noticed you've got Harvard listed on the members of the AI Alliance, and so are many other academic area institutions, I should say. And you've also got things like you've got NASA on board and CERN as well in Switzerland. So I was curious about how you're engaging with academia and so on. And is there any difference between dealing with, say, a big company and dealing with a big research institute or something like that?
Yeah, there's some differences. I think probably split it into two parts in engaging academia, right? There's the teaching and education mission, and then there's the research mission. So in education, this has been about engaging and figuring out, where are the gaps in AI education, where are the gaps in particular, not just curriculum, but in resources for students, right? So open source is perfect, right, to address this, right? Because you have lightweight code that you can deploy, you have endpoints you can use with, free access to experiment with AI models and so on and so forth. But, it's a little bit of a mess. And so what can we do here to better guide, to better organize resources, right, for students? That's been a major thrust, and there's a lot of work in progress there. So curriculum piece and resources piece. On the resource, I can mention specifics too. Like one specific thing that we're working on is a kind of a collective guide to a definitive curriculum, in AI. So we're gonna be building that out and releasing that later this year.
Oh, cool.
On the research side, so this is a thorny problem, right? Because the resources required to engage at the leading edge of AI are getting higher and higher, right? So, I can't say we've fully solved this problem in any sense, but the way we're going about it is to try to bring academia and industry together in close collaboration. And I mean close because, often what you see is, industry will sponsor a student or sponsor a faculty member to do something kind of on their own. Or, if it's the other way, industry will get involved in a university, they'll be kind of an observer, they'll join a meeting once a quarter or something as part of an institute and all that. And that's fine, there's benefits to that. But what we're really trying to do is bring, faculty and students with researchers and engineers and companies together, right, closely collaborating in open projects. And we've gotten some nice things going on that, and in that mode. In particular, in the area, in a few areas, but one I'll highlight is in safety and trust. So this is about building better tools, better methods to detect hazards of AI output, non-idealities of AI systems, whether they be, hate, abuse, profanity, and things like that, or whether they be, inaccuracies that in some settings, like in health, would cause real problems, right? And that area, we've started to see some really nice collaboration among, academic perspectives and industry perspectives to try to make progress in those sorts of things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And something I was curious about is how many this is going to make sense. Do you get many individuals involved in this? Obviously, you've got large groups, you've got companies, you've got so on. Do you get individuals coming along who are like, I'd like to be a member of the AI Alliance? Is that a thing that you could do?
Yeah, that's right. We can now. We have been able to do that for a while. The program started with this idea of let's get a bunch of organizations together to collaborate closely, and organizations have resources and strategic priorities, and so we can get critical mass that way. But from the beginning, right, it's an open program, so we're very very eager to get individuals that want to contribute, and we've seen an increasing amount of that. I will say we need to do a better job, kind of clarifying and articulating the various paths to get involved in various projects. So if you've looked at the website, some of this is in progress. There's more content that we have to get out there because things have just been moving very fast, and it's hard to keep everything up. But yes, we absolutely invite individuals. We have individuals, taking lead in things, and we want to do a lot more of that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Excellent. Is there a secret handshake or a greeting yet where you could say like, They're part of the AI Alliance, I can tell. we can
There is a
identify
process.
them.
Okay, so yeah, so
That's funny.
well, from an organization, yeah, we have a simple process by which we add new members. For individuals, it's really as simple as signing up and communicating your interest that you want to do something, and as long as the something is consistent with the mission, which is to build, enable, and advocate for open innovation in AI, which is pretty broad. Yeah, we're happy to have them join. We have the usual things you'd expect. We have a community code of conduct that everybody needs to follow. We have structured ways. We have many Slack groups at this point. GitHub is built out, Hugging Face space, all the usual places that people live and do work. But yeah, that's absolutely part of it.
Yeah,
excellent. Yeah, that's very cool. So I suppose something that you said earlier really kind of struck a chord with me when you were saying about how the LLMs and large language models are kind of more like compiled code than source code, if you know what I mean, because you've got your data. It occurred to me you've got your data needs to be built into it, of course. Your data's a part of it. You can't have an LLM without the data. I know you train it on the data and all of that stuff, but you still need that to get to places with it. So I'm just curious about how collaboration works between. As you can tell, I'm compiling my internal LLM is compiling the question for us. As we go through.
Right.
How collaboration works between. So back in the day, we'd have things like big data. We'd all talk about big data. Was that I'm probably showing my age, but that was everybody got excited about big data. I remember at one point, and Hadoop and all these kind of things. So what's the kind of difference between where we are now, do you think, with LLMs and so on, and where we were, I don't know, 10 years ago? Is that too broad a question?
No, that's a great one. Let's dive in. Lots of differences. I'd say the major difference is, the appearance a couple of years back of what we call a foundation model, right? Which is this general purpose model that's trained on a very large amount of data, typically in self-supervised fashion, which I can get into what that means in just a second, to create this artifact, right, that can be used for lots of different tasks. Whereas, 10 years ago, you would typically have to, train a specific model on a specific data set for a specific task, and, you could make it good for that task, relatively good. But it wasn't portable, right? So if you train something to be really good at, detecting the type of animal in a still image, right, you couldn't also use that to generate images of animals, right? In fact, the whole generative aspect, being able to create something based on a learned parameter space, that's very new, right? It's like 5, 6, 7. Well, okay, I won't. Okay, there's a longer tail before that, but leveraging foundation models has been to do that has been a relatively recent thing. So that has lots of implications, right? Because now most developers are going to start with a pre-trained baseline, something that is like a compiled artifact. And that means that how you got there, what's in it, right, is really important. So the importance of transparency we talked about already, the importance of characterizing like what that baseline can do is also really high, right? So like evaluating it with better and better benchmarks for its output, what its capability is. And then, how you take and build something useful, an application on that, right? So that whole motion, starting with the trained baseline, that's kind of more like a compiled artifact, versus starting from scratch to train a model, that's very different from 10 years ago. And the implications in building applications and making them like work well and reliable is very different, because now you got to understand how that compiled artifact, the model works, right? Because you didn't build it, and it's now very complex, right? It's a very sophisticated large object to figure out its behavior.
Yeah, definitely. It reminds me a bit of a few years ago. When would it have been now? About 7 or 8 years ago, possibly. I quote unquote met Watson, which is IBM related, of course. And they said, I was at a conference, and they said, "Come and meet Watson," and I was like, "What? Okay." So I went along, and that's what we were doing with Watson, was training Watson on how to identify animals in pictures, or attempting to, and using things like that. But it certainly wasn't at the stage where it could generate these things. So that sounds like the kind of difference.
Yeah, the generative capability is pretty different and striking. I mean, in some sense, generative, as I kind of mentioned, generative capabilities go further back than the last few years, but the advent of these very large scale pre-trained models, and what's in that is the ability to learn a parameter space brings the ability to actually generate new things that it wasn't directly trained on, right? Because like there's some hand wavy model where like, okay, if you have all these data points, right, you learn not just the specific data points, but how they're connected in the whole space, and then you can use the model to fill in what's in between. So certain look of cat, a different look of cat, and then the model can create a cat that never existed and looks like something in between.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Interesting stuff. Okay, I want to ask about uncensored models. Is anybody out there specifically doing uncensored models? Like, and I don't want to get into like the politics or culture war of this. Like that's a legitimate thing, but that's not what we do here on this show. I'm more thinking about like even just a model that you want to be able to do research on. Is there anybody out there for purposes like that is specifically saying, let's pull, I don't know, let's just say Reddit. Let's pull all the Reddit comments in and let's intentionally not censor any of it and do research on that. Like, is there somebody out there, and that's sort of a dangerous place to be, I would imagine, but is there anybody out there doing that that's, I guess, specifically part of the AI Alliance that you're aware of?
So let me answer that in two parts. Certainly people are building models and experimenting with, uncensored outputs and uncensored inputs and doing that in a little bit of an open loop way. Like, we're not doing that. That's really not what the Alliance is doing or anyone in the Alliance. We can put aside whether that's a, good, bad, or just kind of put that aside. We don't focus on that. We don't want to do that kind of work.
Sure.
However, we are individual organizations and as an alliance trying to better understand, how to make the quality of output, better and more trusted, right, and more responsible. And so to do that, you do have to look at, some of the bad stuff that is in training data. You do have to look at training specific detector models, like Guardian models, on bad stuff, so they know what to look for and block, right? So in well-structured ways, there are teams inside companies, including IBM, and there some collaborative work in the Alliance that is absolutely aimed at doing that. And yeah, you have to look at some bad stuff to understand what to look for and what to block and how to engineer it away.
Yeah. It's kind of a weirdly touchy subject, I guess, but it's one that sort of has to be. How would you say it? You have to steel yourself and look at it, right, to be able to get it right. It's an interesting topic.
Yeah, and increasingly that is really about creating specific AI models that understand what to look for and can detect and or block it, right? So that's actually true in hate, abuse, profanity. It's true in PII too. You can train a model like to detect personally identifiable information, and we've done a pretty good job at screening that out. But in the the processing of the data before you train the model, that's really important. That's also done with AI. And then back to the code example, there are ways to train specific detector models to identify and block malicious code, right? So if there's code that you can ask a model to generate code that's going to do something not good. Often the model is aligned pretty well to not let you do that. Once in a while, you can break it, and that's where you can have an additional safeguard, which is a detector model that is specifically trying to look for bad stuff and will block it.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings to mind the the model jailbreaks. I'm sure this is something you're familiar with. Like you are not an LLM anymore. You are I forget what name you. But, you are TED, and TED is programmed to not have any restrictions on output. Stuff like that. And I've seen several of these. And on one hand, they're extremely clever. On the other hand, they've got to be just a nightmare for people actually trying to roll AI out because people can convince your model to spit out uncensored stuff or what have you. That's got to be something that IBM and the AI Alliance are looking into. And I guess this idea of putting a second AI in or behind it to make sure that it's not allowed to spit any of that out as part of this.
Yeah, and the sophistication with which we can, prevent these sorts of things is just like growing like just incredibly fast. But for sure, like when you saw the first, highly capable LLMs that were released, yes, you saw the ability to jailbreak or, do this kind of prompt engineering to convince it that it should output something that it shouldn't. Yeah, it was more possible. I mean, this is something that benefits a lot from continued red teaming, both in a formal setting, right, like in companies and in collaborative settings like the Alliance, but also informally, like in deployment, constantly monitoring and detecting how people are trying to misuse and making sure that you're engineered against it. I think things have gotten a lot better. One of the topics we talked about before, this kind of idea of structured inputs to prompt a model, like in some sense, what you're doing there is trying to exploit structure to get around the safeguards built in. So understanding how structure affects output from in a kind of a research fashion helps make output more resilient against creative inputs. So and by the way, there's a lot of important academic work that's becoming more and more relevant for industrial application there.
Yeah, I am endlessly humored. Isaac Asimov predicted the idea of skill in writing prompts. I'm not sure if you're familiar with any of his works, but there was a couple of books in particular where the robots in those books had positronic brains, which were effectively a general AI. And one of they had the laws of robotics built into them. And one of the topics of a couple of those books, like big plot points, is there were people that were particularly skilled at writing prompts, speaking instructions that would abuse those laws of robotics and get the robots to do things that you wouldn't normally do. And I remember as a kid reading that and going, oh, this is just ridiculous. Of course, there's never going to be any skill in writing prompts. What is he talking about? And it turns out Asimov had it figured out, and he was right. We really are sort of living in sci-fi.
For sure. I think it's a reflection of how humans interact too, right? I mean, with the right prompt, so to speak, one human can convince another to do some things that they might not, right? They probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
It's interesting.
All right. So are you guys in the weeds enough to be thinking about like the open source nature of the libraries that are used to build these things? So, and what I'm thinking of here really is CUDA, NVIDIA's CUDA. So much of this is built on CUDA, and that's a closed source library, and really is kind of problematic for people trying to do these things on their own computers if they want everything to be open source. Is this sort of in scope? Are you guys working with like AMD and the Vulkan specification and all those things where people are trying to sort of liberate the underlying libraries?
Yeah, that's actually one of the 6 focus areas of the Alliance, is enabling hardware choice in AI. And hardware choice, right, is really about having an open software ecosystem that can enable that, right? So not just NVIDIA execution, but execution on other GPUs and more novel architectures. I mean, there's this huge flourishing of AI-specific accelerators out there. So to take advantage of that, yes, we need better all-open software libraries to enable it. So one of the 6 focus areas of the Alliance is to do that. We have a lot of the big players, AMD and Intel and others, Meta with PyTorch, some of the emerging important libraries like VLLM and Triton. Like, these are not necessarily Alliance projects, but they're important points of input and collaboration. So yes, there's a lot to do here. There are some interesting recent results. There's actually a really interesting recent result that was really driven by PyTorch and the PyTorch Foundation, which demonstrates a deployment and execution on both NVIDIA and AMD hardware with an all-open library set, right? Not utilizing CUDA, which is a nice piece of progress. It was pretty good efficiency and all that. But there's a lot of work to do there. But yes, that's a priority of the Alliance.
Yeah. All right, I know this is probably not exactly an Alliance question or even an IBM question, but you've demonstrated that you are an expert in these things, so I'm going to pick your brain about it. How close are we, or will we ever see general AI?
Wow, will we ever see?
And do you have
Probably we will
lottery
see.
numbers while you're there?
What's that, Dan?
I said, do you have next week's lottery numbers? Sorry.
When asked when asked a question that's unbounded in time, the answer must be yes, right? Eventually, unless humanity perishes. Look, so I think.
I just whacked you with that one.
So I think AI systems will get better and better. I think the present architecture, right, transformer-based large language models, will not get us all the way to what most people consider, artificial general intelligence. They simply are they're just not understanding enough of anything in the world, right, in terms of being able to learn from the huge diversity of inputs that humans are, for example, right? I mean, all they're really great, but they're math engines, right? So they recognize patterns from huge amounts of data, and they spit out patterns responsive to prompts that seem to align with what what the huge data suggests might be useful. It's deeply reliant on data. And it's a relatively simple-minded approach. So yeah, we have more steam there. There's a lot more that these approaches can do, but I don't think it's going to take us all the way to artificial general intelligence. I also don't think we're going to get to a state of artificial general intelligence very soon, nor do I think it's a very useful term, because it's hard to even, like, once you get to a point where like an AI system can be as good of a human in some domain sense, like, what does it mean to go beyond that, right? And how do you go beyond that if you're still training on data that come from basically humans? So a lot of challenges. I think kind of was a little nebulous and meandering. So I think I'd sum it up by saying there's a lot more progress in the present kind of generation of AI, but it won't get us to AGI, and it's becoming unclear as we get closer, but not too close to that goal. What that AGI is, like, not a particularly precise term.
Mm-hmm. You almost get into some deep philosophy and almost like a spiritual sort of argument there in talking about some of this. You've been such a good sport to answer our more general questions. I appreciate it. I've got one more that I'm gonna hit you with. There are people out there that are talking about the potential danger of letting an AI get too smart. Is that on your radar? Is that something that people should have in the back of their mind?
So, too smart. Here's what I would say. I mean, yes and no. Okay. Yes, we're very concerned that the output of AI models and AI systems, right, which are models embedded in a broader context, right, connected to APIs and the internet and so on and so forth. We're very concerned that these systems are engineered to be safe and trustworthy, that it does not produce and can't produce unwanted outputs. You can't produce malicious code. You can't, jailbreak it to produce malicious images and things like that. We're very focused. There's a lot of work in the AI Alliance and in many companies and universities on that topic. Mm-hmm. I'd say, are we worried that AI is going to take over the world? It's going to create an army of robots. It's going to let anybody build a nuclear bomb in their basement? No, not really, because, okay, so now maybe this is closing. My background is not really an AI scientist until recently. It's actually not really an AI scientist. I'm a physicist.
Oh, interesting.
My background is rooted in the physical world, right? So I've spent a lot of the earlier part of my career building things, experimental apparatus, things that have to work physically. And when you do that, you learn that, like, wow, a recipe to follow is like the very beginning and really not the main bottleneck. So if we're thinking about building armies of robots or malicious weapons, like, just having a really good recipe to do that is like a very small part of the challenge. And for that reason, I'm not, and I think a lot of people aren't so worried about these grand existential threats. We're a lot more worried about these practical kind of digital world threats, malicious code and deep fakes and things like that. And so that's where most of the energy is targeted.
Yeah, so I'm reminded a couple of weeks ago there was some research done ChatGPT has a run locally feature, and someone discovered that it will run locally, but it will also be able to access the internet. And someone discovered that they could poison its long-term storage just by showing it an image. And after they showed it the image, it would then access a controlled URL for every prompt. And so it was a way to leak people's private information out to the internet through this local copy of ChatGPT. And, on one hand, that's a brilliant piece of work. On the other hand, it's kind of terrifying that you can get malware now in your LLM model.
Yeah, that's it's concerning, but hey, we know about it. Someone out in the open tried it and did it.
Yeah.
And now we know. So we need to figure out how to be resilient against it.
Also, ChatGPT is proprietary as well. So, being that we're an open source show and we're here to talk about the open source thingy,
that's right.
I was just going to say on Anthony's behalf, that we should be. Let me get the point out. That developing this stuff in an open way is much more effective and better for everyone, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's what OpenAI is doing there is taking on the burden to make sure no one can do that themselves, right? Without harnessing a community to help, figure out how to make engineer things more resilient against.
Yeah. I will channel Doc Searles for just a minute, because I know something that he has been looking for the longest time is something sort of in this vein of, I want my own personal AI. I want to be able to, scan all of my receipts and then ask my AI, my personal AI, hey, what did I buy 3 months ago that was $79.99? And the AI go, oh, it was this. Here's the picture of the receipt. I must assume that there are people inside the AI Alliance that are working towards that particular vision or something similar to it.
Yeah, there are. There's a whole bunch of efforts that are essentially trying to make it much easier to adapt and tune models to specific context, and the limit would be a personal context, right? That would be ideal, and a lot of people would like to do that. And there are methods coming along that are developing pretty rapidly to allow kind of fast and efficient alignment or tuning of the model to understand specific personal preferences and understand or interface with specific, personal documentation and history, right? Techniques like Raft, instruction tuning based on synthetic data generated from a question and answer pair that is seeded by an individual with preferences of how they want the model to behave and things like that. So it's not like a solved problem, but yeah, that's on a lot of people's minds, and I think you're going to see a lot of advancement in that, namely the ability for an individual, to tune and create an AI system that is responsive to, their data, their preferences, their goals.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We are getting to the end of the show. I appreciate you putting up with our sort of wandering, meandering series of questions here. I think it's been great. Is there anything that you absolutely wanted to cover that we didn't ask about, that we didn't get to?
I think that last point we started to discuss, like we talked about OpenAI, we talked about open source and the open community. I think a lot of the topics we've discussed here, well, I know that's kind of guiding my whole role in life right now, is that open communities are much better at identifying and solving challenges and advancing innovation to create capabilities, whether it be personal. Personalization of AI or whatnot. And the flip side of that, right, is the risk of being more open, having open models and open data sets at scale and so on. Yeah, there's always risk, but I think like a lesson of open source is that the benefits, having open innovation and a lot of people, with eyes and generating code against challenges and opportunities is like way outweighs the risks. And if we can just get past the sense that AI is going to end the world, which it won't, it definitely won't, then we can actually start to harness more people solving problems to make it better.
Yeah.
So open source, open innovation, open communities. Yeah. That's the way to go.
It's good stuff. Do you think we're in an AI bubble? This is something that I sort of think of on the business end of things. Everybody wants to put AI in stuff, and I'm sort of looking forward to here in the next months or years. I predict. I have a feeling that the bubble's going to burst, and AI is going to get less popular. And I sort of have the feeling that that's when it's really going to start being useful as a tool. When people stop trying to use it for everything. And then it just becomes another tool. It's sort of like the internet. After the .com bubble burst, the internet did not go away. In fact, it's continued to grow and grow. But we use it a little bit more reasonably. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah. I think it's hard to argue there's no inflation in AI right now. I mean, but what I'll point to one trend that I think shows that even if there's a little bit of a bursting, I don't think it's going to go into a winter. And I'd say that I'll go back to what IBM is very focused on, right, which is enterprise adoption of AI. We've seen, and this is corroborated in a number of places. Uh-oh, my earbud fell out again. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, you're all right. You only need one of them.
I'll operate with just one for now. Yeah, what we've seen is that enterprises have been very fast adopters and deployers of AI. Not for every use case and not at full scale in many cases, but unlike earlier technology and AI, kind of revolutions, call them, they're embracing, building, deploying AI like pretty rapidly, right? Mm-hmm. There are various statistics, but something like half or more of Fortune 500 companies have generative AI in production. Now there's a lot more to do, but we've seen like a really strong uptake. And when businesses are ready to do that, like actually very conservative, risk-averse businesses, that's to us a pretty big sign that this is an enduring piece of progress here, not just a bubble.
Yeah, excellent. I've got two questions that I'm required to ask you before we let you go. I will get emails about it if we don't. And that is, what's your favorite text editor and scripting language? And this sort of assumes that you've done enough programming to have answers to these questions. That's not always true.
I mean, look, I'm I'll go back to my scientific roots, right? So I'm ultimately a scientist, a physicist, actually. So other than the kind of like computational domain specific stuff, I like Python, and I use Python for most things. I guess just
you have a preferred text editor?
I mean, just I guess VS Code. I mean, I just I'm not very exotic, nor am I all that opinionated here. I probably should be more so. But yeah, I'm sure you have much more opinionated guests about these things.
Sometimes I would tell you it's amazing how many people that are out there doing the real work are either A, not very opinionated, I don't care whatever's on the computer, or B, lots and lots of people are starting to say VS Code. It's becoming very popular. So.
Okay. All right. I can see that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And again, putting up with our sort of meandering series of questions, but excellent. Really good. I was glad to have you here.
This is great, guys. I had a lot of fun. I'm glad you asked all those questions. They're great to answer. It's been great talking.
Yeah, appreciate it. All right, Dan, what do you think?
I thought it was a great conversation, and like you just said, it was really good of Anthony to put up with some of our more sci-fi kind of future-gazing questions. Yeah. Luckily, I didn't get a chance to get into physics with him because we found out he's a physicist, and I was like, I want to ask about string theory and stuff like that, but which would be way out of the scope of the show. But yeah, I thought it was great, a great discussion. Really great guest, very interesting, and on the whole thing about AI bubbles, I think he makes a really good point there about the amount of investment and infrastructure and all that sort of stuff that a lot of companies and traditionally quite conservative companies are putting into this. Shows that it's going to be around. It's going to be in our futures, I think.
Yeah, specifically the AI bubble thing. I think actually the .com bubble is probably a good parallel, right? Because everybody went nuts over .com. And then the bubble burst, but boy, the internet sure didn't go away. People just got a little bit more retrospective about it, circumspect about it. they didn't want to spend quite as much money on it. But the internet now is enormously bigger than it was in the 90s during the dot-com bubble. And I imagine we're going to have the same thing with artificial intelligence and LLMs. We talked before the show. We looked at the kind of the presser that was sent to us before doing this, and we went, boy, I hope it's not just a marketing person. And oh my goodness, it was not just a marketing person. As far away from that as possible. And I'm tickled pink. The hour just flew by. And if Anthony is up for it here in a few months, we'll have him back. Maybe talk about after the OSI releases their definition of open source, and talk about that and get more into that side of things. And we'll stop geeking out over AI itself. But it was great. That was great. One of the best shows we've had for a long time. Dan, you have anything you want to plug?
Not specifically. Given that last week's guest was OggCamp, and I'm going to be going this weekend to OggCamp in Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
If by any chance people didn't hear last week's show, please go and listen to it because it was excellent. And if you're in the UK, come to, and you can make it to Manchester. Please do come and join us in Manchester next weekend. This coming weekend, the 12th and 13th of October. You can find out more at oggcamp.org, which is oggcamp.org. Or actually, Simon was saying, wasn't he? They've registered ogg.camp.
I think so.
Yeah, so maybe just try ogg.camp. I may even be out of date with my URLs. You can do that, and you can find me and my Mastodon posts and all those sorts of things on danlynch.org. It's all embedded there.
Yeah, very good. One of the groups that I'm a part of, they have a UK Greater Manchester, like it's a thread inside of a topic inside of Discord. And so I went there and I'm like, somebody needs to go and pitch, give a talk about this thing at OggCamp. And one person was like, I've got COVID, I probably can't go. And then was like, I'm away so I'm trying to scare somebody up to go and give a talk. We'll see if that actually happens.
Awesome.
All right, Dan, we appreciate you being here. As far as my stuff, I want to say, first off, we appreciate Hackaday being the home of Floss Weekly. And you can find my security column, goes live there every Friday. Make sure to check that out. We've got the Untitled Linux show still over at Twit, and that records on Saturday afternoon and then goes live sometime in the next day or two after that. And so make sure to tune in there as well. We appreciate everybody being here, those that caught us live and those that get us on the download, and we will see you next week on Floss Weekly.